don't pay attention to the macros, so questions like that, should investors jump in on the rally or stuff like that, like, I don't care. In life, you got to control the things you can control. I can't control Jerome Powell. I also don't want to spend time thinking about the macro. I know biotech, I know software. I'm going to stick to what I know. I'm going to invest in what I know. You know, run around trying to figure out interest rates. Look, it's somebody's job, but it's not my job. I don't want that to be my job. If you want that to be your job, go ahead. And there's plenty of people who have done that really successfully. A guy named George Soros did it pretty good, and many, many others. But, you know, I'm a stock investor. And again, I can look at some macro stuff. I have no problem glancing at it. And I know enough to be dangerous. But I don't have an opinion on everything. I think if you find somebody who has an opinion on everything, you shouldn't listen to anything they say. That person's just a yapper. I have to be really smart about when I lend out my opinion and careful. Because I don't want to feel stupid, you know? You guys all know I like Cramer quite a lot, but I think that's one of his faults, is that he is asked for an opinion on everything. He's willing to give an opinion on everything, which is maybe not, my opinion, not that wise. I don't know if crypto will be the currency in the future. We'll see. It's definitely here to stay. How much it'll be used is another question. For what, why, and where. And then the price of crypto is completely different from how much it'll be used. There's no necessary connection between those two things, by the way. Sarcomere modulator, okay. I know a little bit about this space. It's in Bristol Myers, HCM drug not doing so great. Myosin inhibitor for Duchenne. Come on. Compass Pathways, isn't that that company one of my former executives started? Compass, I think. This is the psychedelic company. Or maybe it was the other one. Did they have a parent? Some other company? Ultragenics is a good one. Okay, so what are we looking at? Mycron? MU, literally Mycron in Greek. I was updating my Bristol Myers model. Bristol Myers is one of the first companies I looked at. I used to stay up nights as a little kid dreaming that I could make a company like Bristol Myers. I was not your average kid. I dreamed that I would be 12 years old, a little suit that was too big, walking into the headquarters, going to the head of the boardroom. I don't know where ambition comes from. It's a good question. I think as you get older and wiser, it starts with like kind of negative connotations, like megalomania, ego, stuff like that, right? And then eventually you get into leadership and, you know, wanting to be somebody that helps others achieve their full potential, which is what I think the job of a CEO is. Sava, $2,400, let's go! The shorts will owe more money than the U.S. Treasury. They won't get stopped out. I mean, the bank will have to stop them out. So I'm just going to say I don't know anything about Mycron. I, of course, know the company. I followed it, you know, on and off since I was a teenager, but other than DRAM, there ain't a lot I can tell you. So this will be more exploratory than informative. Oh, wow. Revenue jumped. So this is like one of the most cyclical businesses. The way Cramer taught me this business passively, not actively, is that basically is this like super cyclical. It's as cyclical as paper or other like super cyclical businesses. We used to trade IP, international paper. And that was like one of the most cyclical businesses. When the economy was doing well, they would make a fortune. When it was doing poorly, they would lose a fortune. So you couldn't, as a child, like the way I thought about that is how do you use a PE ratio? Because every noob is taught to use PE ratios. And I hope that you have learned from me that that's a very faulty idea. Now you could average earnings over 5 years. You know, yes, Jim Cramer. I worked for Jim Cramer when I was 16. So how do you apply PE to negative earnings? You know, that's kind of the mental puzzle there. And if you haven't come across that one yet in investing, maybe you should. All right, so DRAM is actually a pretty low margin business. You think they make a ton on those chips? They don't. 27%. No, I made a post about exiting Liquidia a while back. So I know that they're still, yeah, it's still doing all right, I guess. I think it's come down a little bit, right? But yeah, it was my first post on Wall Street Bets, and then the Wall Street Bets morons banned me because they don't want good stock pickers there. Even though I was one of the first members to give it any attention. You know, no good deed goes unpunished. Yeah, I think Godel Excel plugin would be pretty good, and also export to Excel feature. You can negotiate a job offer depending on the situation. Yeah, sure, of course. There's circumstances with which you will work there and circumstances where you won't. And you gotta give me circumstances. I need my circumstances up front. But if you don't have negotiating leverage, maybe just take the job, right? Go to Mycron's investor relations website. Yeah, Palmer, Carmack worked for Palmer. Carmack used to follow me on Twitter, so I'm sure I could call him up or something, but yeah, he's a legend. Okay, so this was Q3. I want to show the world how to analyze stocks, and I want to give you the software to do it. Not just stocks, though, any investment, any financial security or asset, and then maybe even things outside of that, too. Just how to work with data, how to think about and organize it, and how to use tools that, you know, maybe you're not a programmer, although I think everyone should be a programmer. And I'll probably do some like classes on how to use this stuff if you are a programmer or if you're not, or, you know, just basics. It's gross margin, what the heck? Look at Mycron. So in cyclical downturns, the gross margin's negative. All right, do you see that, chat? So I'm talking about gross margins negative, meaning it costs money to make their product more than they sell it for. You might say, why not just throw the product away? Well, hold on. What is cost of goods sold, chat? I'm going to teach you something. What goes into cost of goods sold? You're making DRAM. What is this line? What is it? You guys know? Maybe ask ChatGPT. How do you make DRAM? It says crushed berries. Okay, you know what? Google is not so great. I'm going to ask ChatGPT. Okay, you do need a wafer. You need to oxidize it. You need to use lithography with a photoresist layer. Is that a mask? You need to etch. You need to dope. You need to form capacitors. Is that a separate process? And then you do all this other stuff. Clean room environment, etc., etc. Not easy. So is silicon the main ingredient, if you will? Yeah, silicon is the primary material, which is the substrate for semiconductors. Price can range based on purity, market demand, and the form. High purity silicon wafers can cost anywhere from $10 to several $100s a wafer. Interesting. Sounds like the wafer is pretty cheap and the process is the expensive part, or both? You're correct. The wafer itself is relatively inexpensive compared to the overall cost of the process. The wafers can be affordable, but the complex steps require expensive equipment and significant labor. So what goes into the COGS? Is this all wafers? What do you think, chat? So what's in here? Wafers, labor. Emmanuel says labor. Great. Anything else? Electricity. Machines. Thank you, Alex. That is the question. How do we recognize these? Because look at these quarters, right? If it cost me $4.4 billion to sell 4 billion of chips, I'm just not going to sell the chips, right? Why lose extra money? So machines are depreciated. And depending on that depreciation, these COGS could kind of not really reflect the true economic gross margin, right? The actual gross margin net of machines might be positive. That's the point. Do you get that? The machines you buy once, but you depreciate them over time. So they might actually have positive gross margins, But because you have to expense the machines a certain way, that's sort of the issue. So here you have GAAP, non-GAAP over here. I think in non-GAAP, they basically are, as always, they're making adjustments, but it's not clear. Well, you know what we can do is we can look at gross margins. I'm sorry, we can look at cash flow from operations. Mycron was a small company way back when. Come a long way, dog. All right, so let's look at cash flow from operations because that's going to be pretty important. So on the net income side, they lost 1.3 billion. This is the best accounting lesson you could take. You really want to understand accounting, look at Mycron. Net income, GAAP net income, negative 1.3 billion, right? That's from our model. Their reporting was negative 1.2, so we're pretty close, about 30 million off. So what makes the difference? Well, let's add back depreciation. That's the main difference. And what do we have? The loss goes to a profit. It goes from 1.2 in losses to 1.3 in gains. That's positive $1 billion. And that all came from depreciation. So we can actually do something even crazier here. We can do almost like a separate line item if we wanted. I've never done this before, but let's try it this way. Let's do depreciation. And then let's do gross profit plus depreciation. And let's do gross margin. I'll put these in like this. So now you can see that excluding the machines, if you exclude the machines, the gross margin was 40%, which is why they're willing to sell the chips on the income statement. It looks like they're willing to sell the chips for a loss, which no company would do that. You'd rather burn the chips, right? Throw them away. Yeah, I don't think you could do much with the equipment when it's gone. It's pretty much useless at that point. Yeah. So that's the big difference here. Why ain't it 1401? Oh, okay. There's a separate, okay, there we go. And so now you have capex. That's the problem with this is that he spent 1.8 billion on capex. You're back in sort of this negative territory. Let's see if we add that back. You can do it negative, positive, doesn't matter, however you see fit. Autism's a complicated illness. Some people prefer not to think of it as an illness. I would say we all want dignity. So if you choose to feel that way, that's fine. I spend a lot of time trying to make treatments for autism. So, like all psychiatric illnesses, including Alzheimer's, it's very hard to know where to start. So one of the places to start is genetically defined autism, like Fragile X syndrome. In Fragile X syndrome, the FMRP protein is malformed. FMRP is a very bizarre protein. It results in very profound autism. So that gives us some clues as to what's happening in autism. Autism is sometimes called a spectrum disorder because there's a spectrum of symptoms. It's not really a spectrum of severity. Severity is always present in medical diagnoses. You can have moderate asthma, severe asthma, mild asthma. The spectrum part relates to three different constellations of symptoms. The first is aberrant behaviors. Aberrant behaviors include things like hand flapping, which is common, and other kind of stereotypical repetitive behavior. The second is an emotional deficit, so an inability to speak with other people, look them in the eye, want social interaction, understand social cues, things like that. Finally, there's often this, as well as, being mute. That's a fairly common thing as well, folks who are pretty mute. Finally, there's a fairly profound cognitive impairment. So, those are sort of the three main things. Stereotyped and very diverse array of behaviors, social deficits, and cognitive impairment. There's not much you can do about autism. I think therapy can help a little bit. We still don't understand it too much from a medical perspective. Doctors will give drugs like SSRIs just to give something, but SSRIs don't do anything for autism. Best thing you could do is, of course, just love your child, and that goes without saying, I think. It really is a tough and frustrating thing. One day we'll understand the brain better and understand what's happening. The desire to try all this stuff, like, oh, maybe it's this diet, or maybe it's, things like that. It's all flailing, attempting to alter reality. And the reality is we just don't have any idea what's happening. I don't think a single drug has been shown to ever be effective in autism. And two of my companies had different treatments there. So we can do free cash flow, which of course is just net income, or cash flow from operations here, I should say, minus PP&E or capex. And we can see that there was a negative free cash flow for that specific quarter. But free cash flow is a weird thing because you're buying this capex for future revenue, right? The cash flow from operations is kind of what you're getting from capex from a while back. Yeah, I think the good thing about autism is it's mostly confined to the brain, right? The mind. As society has a better understanding of just how common this illness is, we're starting to get a sense for a treatment someday, but also respecting people who have this condition, which I think is great. 10 or 20 years ago, I think it was a lot more difficult. So just something to keep in mind. I wish you the best as you navigate that. It can be very expensive, and it can be very difficult for families. It causes a lot of productivity loss. Most people with autism do not have sounds like your son's very different, but most people with autism don't have some Rain Man magic trick ability to do math or something like that. That's, I think, a harmful stereotype. The average person with autism has an IQ of around 80. This isn't some trade-off where it's like, oh, I get intelligence, but I lose social ability. That's a common misunderstanding. It certainly can happen. The person excels in one area at the detriment of another, but it's fairly uncommon. And again, a harmful stereotype, I think. So let's stick to Mycron for a second here. So you get the picture. Huge amount of capex. I don't know, what are they buying? Are they buying all ASML AMAT equipment? Is that what they're doing, chat? I don't think Elon is autistic, no. Again, there is this tendency to want to be in this neuroatypical or spectrum situation, and I think it's really kind of harmful. A lot of people say colloquially oh, I'm just autistic or something like that, and it's just not constructive at all to the people who actually suffer from this. You're really being kind of disrespectful. As much as people think I'm this irreverent jerk, I actually do care a lot about healthcare. Human health is precious. It's all we have. And, it's kind of sacred in a lot of ways to me. But, I don't expect people to understand that. But I think that, autism is a really, really tough one. It's just such a big problem out there, and we don't have the answers yet. So I hope that science can catch up, but there's sometimes in life, there are eras in civilization where we stay dark on things for centuries. And the mind is one of those things. Our understanding of the brain and the mind and how it works really has not materially advanced in 100 years. You can make an argument otherwise, of course, and I could easily make that argument for you, but in reality, all the advances are nominal. We could do all kinds of interesting experiments, but are they really revealing of anything important? I would say no. And we're still just guessing on so many of this. So we're in this era that's unfortunate. You know, I had a friend die of cystic fibrosis just before the Vertex cures came out, and he would have been cured. The Vertex drugs are functional cures for cystic fibrosis. And so he lived in an era before, and, you know, we're talking about days of, 5 to 10 years, a really tiny era. He lived in an era before the technology could get there. And, really unfortunate timing, given he was just years away from the research getting there. So you think about how lucky we may be in some ways, but not so lucky in others. Yeah, just if he was born just 5 or 10 years later, he would have probably been fine. But instead, he went to high school with this guy. We were all planning our futures, and he was planning his death. And he died a little earlier than you would actually expect for cystic. So it's really, really rough. All right, let's look at some 10Ks for Mycron. So I want to get a sense for, I think I understand the business. We all use Mycron products, right? We know what they do. 1978, Boise, Idaho. I did not know they were in Boise. 5th largest semi in the world, 43,000 employees, memory and storage. We all know RAM is volatile, right? LPD RAM, what's that? You guys know what that is? DDR, it's DDR4, DDR5, LPD RAM 4, and LPD RAM 5. Low power? Networking business unit, okay. Sometimes I read mostly press releases. Yeah, I mean, like Tom's Hardware or something like that would be good for Mycron. Okay, they have these 1X, 1Y, 1Z, 1-alpha. Looks like they're manufacturing. Yeah, it's a very cyclical business. So they're in a boom right now, but they could be in a bust just next year. Okay, now they have mobile business unit. So that's NAND with a multimedia controller, embedded multimedia controller, universal flash. Okay. It's funny with AI, I'm curious if they sell memory to NVIDIA. I don't think so. Yeah, Dalton, sure. All right, now EBU, embedded business unit. I went to high school in Upper East Side. It was almost like a Gossip Girl episode. Very, very fond memories. I dated one Bronx science girl. Okay, so that all adds up. You have to have a thirst for learning. Just learn everything you can. Learn it over and over again. I mean, there are people who have PhDs in chemistry, but you use it or lose it. PhD does not guarantee that you remember things for life. So, unless you get constant re-exposure to the subject, getting your PhD does not, or any other degree for that matter, even finishing high school. You remember all the algebra you learned in high school? You got a high school diploma. It just means that at some point you did learn it. Prison was great. I made the most of it. I studied math mostly, a little bit of computer science, biology, of course, kept on top of the pharma industry, made some new friends. Yeah, we're just on Mycron here. Ooh, I should have updated this, shouldn't I? No, we didn't get computers for coding. Yeah, the patents would be useful to look at, I agree. Fiscal 2023 was really bad, huh? So that's one of the other weird things, as I hope I gave you something to think about on the PE ratio, like what happens if a company's earnings are negative? Can you apply a PE ratio to that? Same thing applies here, where we're trying to figure out, do you think the stock price correlates with the boom and bust of the revenue? Do you think that the stock price goes up and down with the revenue? And why or why not? You would think that that's got to happen, right? At least to some extent. Not necessarily. It's really kind of a mind trip that the company's earnings can decline from positive to negative and the stock can actually go up. You know, if you're taught the real simple PE ratio stuff, you really lose out on understanding what business is all about. So of course earnings are important, and of course growth is important, but it's not everything. When you're judging a stock price, it's really a completely different thing, isn't it? So let's take a look at gross margins over time. Positive 38, positive 45, negative 9. Boom, bust. In the bust, you just hope to not lose everything, right? 1, 9, 1, 22, 8, 31. Okay, there's earnings per share. Same thing as net income, just okay, so what can cause a business to go, I want you to think about this, to go from 6 or 7 billion in net income, then 8 or 9 in net income, billion in net income, then negative 6. And how do we know that negative 6 is going to be negative 14 next year? The conditions of the industry, very, very brutal, and they change quickly. But this is just a small picture. Some people call this cyclical growth. That even though there are these business cycles, and that's where the term really comes from. I hate it when people use the term in crypto. Ugh, really pisses me off. Because there's no real cycle in crypto. There's a cycle in DRAM because there's supply and demand. And the supply and demand lags each other. The term is cycle. Yeah, exactly, Elmer. So I'm going to draw supply, and well, I'm going to draw demand in green, okay? So demand will go up, you know, maybe a new chip comes out. And here's what will end up happening. Supply is sort of lagging. Supply sees the demand going up, and they catch up. But in this period, we call this a shortage, right? Supply hasn't caught up to demand. But supply will continue, and demand might even start to tail off. And supply doesn't realize this for a while, and this we call a glut, right? By the time we're out of the recession or the glut, demand is back, and supply is still confused as to what to do. Maybe supply is a little more conservative this time because it got beat last time. So that's business cycles. NVIDIA is a very interesting question about, will NVIDIA hit the same thing happening? The problem is with NVIDIA is that they control the supply. A lot of times in DRAM, the actions are based on your competitors. It's a collective action of many players. The red line is many different companies, many firms deciding together. In the case of NVIDIA, it's just them. So the industry's really, you know, kind of pegged to them. Yeah, people want to take the cycle or the cyclical idea and they want to extend it. This is a nice mental model, but it doesn't really work. And it certainly doesn't work on prices. You know, so people tried to distort and make the cycle concept work for crypto. So crypto has had this thing, or I don't know if you chart Bitcoin. Let's see if we can chart Bitcoin. And I like Bitcoin. So this is 08. I don't know. Let's see if we could do this every 4 years. Is that okay? So Bitcoin is more or less, I mean, I could pull up the chart, obviously. This is 0. It's more or less done something like this, right? And that looks like a cycle. It sort of feels like, okay, here's a pattern. But there's nothing that says the next thing that happens isn't that. And it just stays down here forever, right? And there's nothing that says that this can't happen. It goes up and we never see a cycle again. So anyway, the idea of the cycle doesn't really apply here. There's the halvening, which doesn't really make much of a difference, but we're tempted to think, okay, X happened, Y happened, X happened, Y happened, X happened, Y happened. Next time X happens, Y is going to happen, right? But this is just Pavlovian. Pavlov, you're not a dog like Pavlov, right? Anything could happen in markets, anything. Like I said, we could have it down 99% and stays there forever, or up 1,000% and stays up forever. There's no real reasoning that says that it has to go up or it doesn't. In fact, the opposite is true, right? If you knew something was going to happen in the future, you could predict it today. Now let's look at free cash flow for Mycron. So this is cash flow after expenses for equipment. And you can see that it was positive 2 billion, positive 3 billion, then negative 6. They wiped out all the earnings for the last 2 years. That's annoying, isn't it? But let's go back a little further. We got to go back a long time for these cyclical companies. They're not easy to understand right away. And I love Godel because people give me really disparate assignments. If you join Godel, I'm happy to work on stocks for you. MD&A was management discussion and analysis. Probably the most important part of most 10Qs or 10Ks. But look at the CNBU business unit. 9 billion, 12 billion, 13 billion, awesome, right? What's next year? It's got to be like 15 billion, right? Nope. Can you imagine? That's your... Isn't that crazy? There is some delayed reaction in stock markets, and you can arbitrage them to some extent. It's something obviously people at Jane Street and 2Sigma and Renaissance and D.E. Shaw study very carefully. You have to study that really intelligently and carefully. It's not just a simple... You can't look at it too simply. Everything has to be done through the right lens. That's what I was talking about last night with respect to cassava. If you're looking at the problem through the wrong lens, you're not going to get anywhere. Even a really good drug can fail a clinical trial. It's one thing that I pointed out that can be easy to take for granted. If your drug only works over 3 or 4 years, which kind of seems plausible given how long the Alzheimer's disease process takes, why do you do 1 year clinical trial? I wouldn't gamble with 0 days, unless you're writing them or something. You find a systematic advantage that somebody else hasn't found. I wouldn't bother with 0 DTEs. Now, if you're a truly skilled trader, perhaps you can make money on them, but there are very, very few people who are truly skilled traders. Most of us are just trying to gamble a little bit. And heck, I do it too, It's human nature, but just don't let it control you or hurt you. If you're gambling and losing a lot, you don't think that you're going to get it back next time. You're just gambling and it's time to stop. Building an algo is different. Now you're trying to be a quant investor. But just understand that, it's a competitive space. You're not the only guy building an algo. There's a lot of guys out there. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try it. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. You can do it. But just be ready. Stock market's a violent place. People like me ready to mug you. There's no rule against mugging in the stock market.